I should have known something was wrong when Julian insisted I wear the burgundy gown instead of the midnight blue one I'd chosen for the founder's gala. Not the elegant velvet that brought out the amber flecks in my brown eyes, but the one he'd commissioned from Madame Levine 3 weeks ago and delivered to my modest apartment with a note that read, "Wear this Saturday. No exceptions." At 26 I'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when your family's reputation hung by threads as thin as spider silk. A dress was the least of my concerns. Tonight was supposed to mark new beginnings, the public announcement of our engagement, the moment Julian would tell all of Thornwick's elite that he'd chosen me despite everything. Despite the scandal. Despite the bankruptcy. Despite my family's name becoming something people whispered about rather than aspired to. The Crimson Lotus dominated Thornwick's theater district, all Gothic arches and gas lamps casting amber shadows across marble floors. I'd been here once before years ago when my father still commanded respect in banking halls and my mother wore diamonds that weren't paste. Tonight, Julian had secured the venue himself. Tonight he'd promised, everything would change. My heels echoed across the entrance hall as the doorman greeted me with a bow that felt more mocking than respectful. "Miss Hale, your party is already assembled." Your party, not your fiancé. The phrasing should have been my second warning. I followed the sound of string music and laughter through the corridor, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked my movement. The Founders' Gala attracted Thornwick's most powerful, mortal nobility and select vampire dignitaries, old money and new power, all congregated here to see and be seen. I recognized faces from charity functions and society pages. 300 guests easily, all dressed in silk and jewels that cost more than my annual salary as an archivist. The leather journal tucked under my arm, containing the genealogical research I'd spent months compiling, proof of my family's historical importance, suddenly felt impossibly naive. Julian stood at the center table, prime positioning beneath the chandelier. But he wasn't alone. Vivian Ashford occupied the chair that should have been mine. Auburn hair swept into an elaborate updo, a gown of midnight blue, the exact shade I'd wanted to wear, and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. I knew her by reputation. The Chancellor's daughter. The Ashford family had been Thornwick's political dynasty for 6 generations. She'd been featured in the Thornwick Gazette last month, discussing her father's upcoming re-election. I stopped 3 feet from the table. My journal, containing all my carefully documented proof of the Hale family's worthiness, suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories to you, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. Julian's smile widened as he noticed me. Not the warm expression I'd memorized over 2 years of courtship, but something colder, more calculated, the look of a man executing a plan. "Clara." He stood, gesturing to an empty chair at the adjacent table. Not beside him. Not where a fiancé should sit. "I'm glad you came. I wanted to tell you personally before the formal announcement." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of awareness spreading through nearby tables. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The quartet in the corner continued playing, oblivious to the small drama unfolding beneath the chandeliers. "Tell me what?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. The journal pressed against my ribs like a shield. Vivian's hand moved to rest on the table, and the light caught on her ring, a ruby the size of a quail's egg, set in platinum and surrounded by diamonds. An Ashford family heirloom. I recognized it from society portraits going back 3 generations. About tonight's celebration. Julian's tone dripped with concern that didn't reach his eyes. I realized there may have been some confusion about our arrangement. I wanted to clarify before things became awkward. Confusion. I repeated the word like it was in a language I'd never learned. "You understand, don't you, Clara?" He leaned forward slightly, playing to our growing audience. "It was never realistic. Your family's history." He paused, letting the silence do its work. "Well, some stains don't wash out." Vivian placed her hand over Julian's, the gesture possessive and practiced. "Don't blame him for being practical, dear." Her voice was honey and venom. "We can't all marry for sentiment. Some of us have responsibilities to our families, to society. Surely you understand that better than most." The meaning underneath her words was clear. You whose family destroyed their own legacy should know the cost of poor choices. I thought, he started, but Julian cut me off with a sympathetic tilt of his head. I know what you thought. And that's my fault, truly. I should have been clearer about my intentions. Our friendship was genuine, Clara. It's genuine. I hope you know that. I glanced at the journal still clutched in my hands. All that research you did tracing your family's contributions to Thornwick's founding, it's admirable. Really. But history is just that. History. Around us, I felt rather than saw the attention of Thornwick's elite sharpening knives. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theater, and I was the evening's entertainment. The dress, I said quietly. Sent me this dress. Burgundy suits you. Vivian's smile could have cut glass. It's appropriately somber. Good choice, Julian. The implication struck home. I was wearing mourning colors to what I'd thought was my engagement announcement. The entire room would see it, would understand the symbolism, would laugh at the girl too stupid to realize she'd been dressed for her own humiliation. If you'll excuse us, Julian said not unkindly, we have guests to greet. I do hope you'll stay for the announcement. No hard feelings. He didn't wait for an answer. The clink of silverware against crystal cut through the murmur of conversation. Lord Ashford, Julian's father, Chancellor of Thornwick's Mortal Council, stood at the head of the ballroom, commanding attention with the ease of a man born to power. Honored guests, esteemed members of both mortal and immortal courts. His voice carried across the vaulted ceiling without strain. Tonight, we gather to celebrate an occasion that brings together two of Thornwick's finest families. My feet had carried me nowhere. I stood frozen between tables, neither sitting nor leaving, a statue carved from humiliation and burgundy silk. It is my profound joy to announce the engagement of my son Julian Ashford to Lady Vivian Ashford. He paused for the applause, his smile magnanimous. A union that strengthens the bonds between our political and financial institutions, secures Thornwick's prosperity for generations to come. The applause swelled. Vivian stood, her midnight blue gown catching the light as she moved to Julian's side. They looked perfect together. Powerful. Untouchable. Everything I had foolishly believed I might become. This city was built on the backs of great families, Lord Ashford continued, his gaze sweeping the room. Families who understood duty, sacrifice, and the importance of preserving what matters. But it also serves as home to cautionary tales, reminders of what happens when ambition exceeds wisdom, when legacy crumbles beneath the weight of poor judgment. Several heads turned toward me. The whispers started like wine through dead leaves. We've all witnessed such falls. Families whose names once commanded respect, now reduced to shadows of former glory. His pause was surgical, precise. It teaches us to be discerning in our associations, careful in our choices. After all, one cannot rebuild prestige on a foundation of pity and misplaced sentiment. We must be honest about what and who truly belongs in society's upper echelons. He smiled then, kind and cruel all at once. This engagement reminds us that Thornwick rewards merit, not merely inherited names that have long lost their shine. To Julian and Vivian, may their union be everything that true partnership should be. The words young women who mistake pity for affection didn't need to be spoken aloud. They hung in the air, implicit in every syllable, confirmed by every eye that slid toward me with a mixture of schadenfreude and second-hand embarrassment. The journal slipped from my hands. Pages scattered across the marble floor. Centuries of Hale family history, meticulously researched proof of our contributions to Thornwick's founding, documentation of merchant routes and trade agreements and royal appointments. All of it reduced to parchment sliding beneath the feet of people who'd already decided we didn't matter. Clara. Isla materialized at my elbow, her face stricken. She was the only friend who'd stood by me through my family's fall, the daughter of a minor noble who'd defied her parents' warnings to maintain our friendship. Come on. Let's get you out of here. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Laughter had started, not universal, not unanimous, but enough. Polite chuckles hidden behind gloved hands. Pointed whispers. Satisfied smirks of people watching someone else's misfortune confirm their own superiority. I'd known my family had fallen. I'd lived with the shame of it, the whispers, the sudden unavailability of people who'd once called themselves friends. But I believed, stupidly, naively, that Julian was different. That his courtship was real. That tonight would be the beginning of something new. Instead, he'd orchestrated my complete and public destruction. Made me a spectacle. A warning. A punchline. The ballroom door seemed impossibly far away, miles across marble that might as well have been quicksand. Every step would be watched. Every moment of my retreat would feed the story that would circulate through Thornwick social circles for months. Did you hear about the Hale girl? Thought Julian Ashford would actually marry her. Wore burgundy to her own humiliation. Pathetic, really. Isla tugged at my arm. Clara, please. I took one step. Then another. The crowd parted from me like I carried disease. Perhaps I did. The contagion of failure, the infection of fallen status. I'd made it perhaps 10 feet when the doors burst open. Sounds like thunder in a tomb. Massive oak doors slamming against stone walls with enough force to rattle chandelier crystals. Cold wind rushed into the ballroom, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something older, something that made the hair on my arm stand at attention. Every gas lamp along the eastern wall guttered and died. The quartet's music died mid-phrase, bows frozen above strings. Conversation evaporated. Even the whispers about me ceased, replaced by something far more primal. Fear. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight that seemed too bright, too silver, too other to be natural. Tall, easily over 6 feet. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention so much as command it by right of existence. Dark hair swept back from a face too pale to be human, too perfect to be real. He wore black on black on black, tailored with a precision that made Julian's expensive suit look like a costume. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every vampire noble in attendance stood in perfect unison, their movements synchronized and immediate. A gesture of respect so profound it bordered on worship. The mortal aristocrats followed a heartbeat later, confusion and terror warring across their faces. I stood frozen, not from protocol but from the weight of his gaze as it swept across the ballroom and landed inexplicably, impossibly on me. Sebastien Vale, the vampire king, the immortal who ruled the night court from his citadel in the northern cliffs. The creature parents used to frighten children into obedience. Be good or the vampire king will come for you in the dark. He was supposed to be a recluse. A myth with just enough reality to maintain the veil treaty between mortal and immortal Thornwick. No one had seen him in public for decades. Centuries, some claimed. Yet here he stood, his crimson eyes, the color of fresh blood, of warning, of hunger, fixed on me with an intensity that made my humiliation seem like a half-remembered dream. The vampire king had arrived, and he was looking at me like I was the only person in the room who mattered. The vampire king walked like death itself had learned elegance. Each step across the marble floor was measured, unhurried, inevitable. He moved with the kind of grace that came from centuries of existence, predatory and fluid, as though gravity held less claim on him than it did on mortal flesh. The crowd parted without conscious thought, bodies responding to an instinct older than society, older than civilization itself. Danger approaches, move or die. 2 figures flanked him at the entrance, guards, though the word felt insufficient. One was a mountain of a man with dark skin and silver eyes, his hand resting on the pommel of a sword that looked ancient enough to predate Thornwick itself. The other was leaner, amber-eyed, watching the crowd with the focused intensity of a wolf assessing prey. They remained at the threshold like sentinels, allowing their king to walk alone into the heart of mortal territory. Sebastien Vale stood easily 6'3", his frame lean but powerful beneath the severe cut of his clothing. Black on black, broken only by silver threading at his collar and cuffs. Patterns that might have been decorative or might have been something older, something protective. His pale skin seemed to absorb the remaining lamplight and reflect it back as something colder, something that had never known the warmth of a living sun. Dark hair swept back from a face that was beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, magnificent and terrible and wholly inhuman. The vampire nobles had bowed so deeply their foreheads nearly touched their knees. The mortal aristocrats followed suit with varying degrees of panic and confusion, unsure whether to honor or flee. Only Lord Ashford attempted to recover some semblance of authority, stepping forward with his politician's smile already forming. Your Majesty, this is an unexpected honor. Sebastian's gaze passed over him like he was furniture. Less than furniture. background noise in a conversation didn't concern him. Lord Ashford's words died in his throat. He stepped back, his face flushing with the kind of humiliation he'd just orchestrated for me minutes earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. But Sebastien wasn't looking at Lord Ashford. Wasn't looking at Julian or Vivian or any of the 300 witnesses to my destruction. He was looking at me. Time seemed to slow as he crossed the remaining distance. Space between us collapsing with each measured step. I should have moved. Should have run, bowed, done something other than stand frozen with scattered pages at my feet in burgundy silk that suddenly felt like armor instead of mockery. He stopped directly before me. This close, I could see that his eyes weren't simply red. They were layered, crimson shot through with darker burgundies and lighter rubies, the color of blood in all its stages. Ancient blood. Fresh blood. The promise of blood yet to be spilled. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent ballroom like a bell tolling midnight. Clara Hale of the House of Hale. Each word was pronounced with careful precision, with weight. Daughter of merchants who built trade routes when the city was little more than a fishing village. Keeper of histories most in this room have conveniently forgotten. Woman of resilience. The last words landed like a benediction. Like a crown. My name. My full name, my family's name. Spoken with reverence instead of pity. My profession acknowledged as worthy rather than quaint. My survival called resilience instead of desperation. Your Majesty. Julian's voice cracked slightly as he stepped forward, Vivian's hand falling from his arm. Surely you're not acquainted with... Sebastien turned his head perhaps an inch. Just enough for his gaze to land on Julian with the weight of 8 centuries of existence. Julian stumbled backward as if struck, his face draining of color. Vivian caught his arm to steady him, her own expression somewhere between fury and terror. The Vampire King returned his attention to me as though Julian had never spoken. As though Julian had never existed at all. They mock what they cannot comprehend. His voice was softer now, meant for me though everyone in the ballroom could hear. Your bloodline is older than their purchased titles, your strength forged in fires they've never known. The Hales navigated storms that would have destroyed these posturing children. Your ancestors built the foundations of the city when mine ruled from shadow. He paused and something flickered across his inhumanly beautiful face. Memory, perhaps, or recognition. I do not forget true nobility. Before I could respond, before I could even process the words, he removed a ring from his own hand. It was ancient, clearly, the silver darkened with age and etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Wrapped around the band was a stone the color of arterial blood, deep and rich and gleaming with an inner light that had nothing to do with the chandelier above. The stone seemed to pulse, like it had its own heartbeat, its own life. If these fools cannot recognize worth, Sebastien said, his crimson eyes holding mine, then let them recognize power. He took my hand. His fingers were cool but not cold, firm but surprisingly gentle. My journal lay forgotten at my feet. The humiliation of minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by something I couldn't name. Shock, confusion, bizarre detachment as though I were watching this happen to someone else. Sebastien slid the ring onto my finger. It was too large at first, sized for his hand, not mine. Then it adjusted, the metal tightening with a sensation that should have been uncomfortable but instead felt like recognition, like something clicking into place. Stone warmed against my skin, growing hot enough that I gasped. But the heat didn't burn. It sank into my flesh like an embrace, like a brand, like a promise written in blood and silver. The ballroom erupted. Gasps and shouts collided with the scraping of chairs as people stood. The vampire nobles looked shocked, genuinely, deeply shocked. Their expressions shifted rapidly to acceptance, even satisfaction. Whatever rules governed them, whatever laws bound their kind, this act apparently satisfied them in ways I didn't understand. The mortal aristocrats were chaos. Some looked thrilled at the scandal. Others appeared horrified. Lord Ashford's face had gone from red to white to purple in rapid succession, his carefully orchestrated evening hijacked by a power he couldn't even pretend to control. Julian looked like he might be sick. Vivian looked like she wanted to set something on fire. Sebastien raised his voice, and the room silenced instantly. The king's betrothal is sealed. His tone brooked no argument, expected no challenge. Let any who question it speak now. 300 people held their breath. No one spoke. No one dared. He turned to me, offering his arm with the courtly grace of another era. Shall we depart, my intended? My intended. The words should have terrified me. Should have sent me running. But running to what? Back to Julian's pity? Back to my modest apartment and my archives and my slow, grinding survival in a city that had already decided I didn't matter? I took his arm. What choice did I have? The crowd parted for us like the sea before a storm. Isla stood frozen near one of the pillars, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Whether from relief or terror I couldn't tell. As we passed Julian's table, Sebastien paused. The movement was slight, barely noticeable, but Julian flinched as though expecting a blow. The Vampire King leaned in just slightly, his voice pitched low but carrying to everyone nearby. You had something precious and discarded it like refuse. Pause heavy with meaning. Now watch it become untouchable. When we were moving again through the ballroom, past the guards who bowed deeply to their king, out into the cool night air. A carriage waited in the courtyard, black lacquer polished to a mirror shine, silver filigree worked into patterns that hurt to look at directly. 2 horses stood in harness, and they were not ordinary horses. Their coats were the color of moonlight, their eyes reflected light like cats, and they stood too still, too perfect, too aware to be entirely animal. Sebastien handed me up into the carriage with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything I knew about vampires. The interior was red velvet and darkness, lit by a single lamp that cast more shadow than light. I found my voice as he settled across from me. Why? The word came out raw, desperate. Why would you do this? He was silent for a moment as the carriage began to move, the horses' hooves clicking against cobblestone with an oddly musical rhythm. Through the window, I watched the crimson lotus fade into the distance, taking with it the only life I'd known. Because tonight, Sebastien finally said, his crimson gaze fixed on me with unsettling intensity, fate demanded I be exactly where you needed me to be. That's not an answer. No. A slight smile touched his lips, there and gone like moonlight through clouds. It's not. The ring on my finger grew warmer, the stone pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Or perhaps my heartbeat was matching it, I couldn't tell anymore. We've never met, I said, trying to grasp something solid in this rapidly spiraling nightmare. I don't understand any of this. I don't understand you. No. He leaned back against the velvet, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. But I knew someone who looked through your eyes once. 800 years ago. The words should have been meaningless. Instead, they sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. You are not the first Clara Hale I have known, Sebastien continued softly, almost to himself. And I fear you may be the last. The carriage rattled on through Thornwick's darkened streets, carrying me away from humiliation and toward something I couldn't name. Behind us, the mortal world and its petty cruelties faded into insignificance. Ahead, the Vampire King's citadel waited in the northern darkness. And I, Clara Hale, keeper of histories, wore a ring that bound me to mysteries 8 centuries deep. The Vampire King's castle sat on the northern cliffs like a crown of thorns pressed against the sky. We traveled through Thornwick's vampire district. The Shadow Market, they called it, though no one said the name aloud without a trace of fear. The mortal city ended at the Veil Wall, that ancient barrier of stone and magic that had separated our worlds for generations. Beyond it, the streets changed. Cobblestones gave way to black basalt that seemed to drink in moonlight rather than reflect it. Gas lamps were replaced by blue flames that burned without fuel, without heat, casting everything in an otherworldly glow that made my skin look corpse pale. Creatures moved through those streets, things I'd only read about in the archives, relegated to the mythology sections that most scholars dismissed as superstition. A woman with moth wings folded against her back bargaining with a merchant whose fingers were too long, too many-jointed. Children with eyes that reflected light like animals. A figure that might have been human except for the way shadows clung to it like living things. I'd pressed myself against the carriage window, watching it all with the horrified fascination of someone realizing that every nightmare ever whispered might be true. Citadel rose before us, massive and impossible, built from stone so black it seemed to be cut from the night itself. It didn't sit on the cliff so much as grow from it, organic and ancient, as though the mountain had decided to reach toward the sky and taken this shape. Towers spiraled upward like frozen lightning. Windows glowed with that same blue moon fire. Gargoyles lined the battlements, and I couldn't tell if they were statues or simply very, very still. The gates opened as we approached. Massive things of iron and silver worked into patterns that hurt to look at directly. No guards called out. No one challenged our entry. The gates simply knew their king had come home and welcomed him. Inside was gothic grandeur that took my breath away. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Tapestries hung along the walls, so old the images had faded to suggestions of battles and coronations and events I couldn't name. Portraits lined one corridor. Previous rulers, I assumed, their eyes following our passage with unsettling awareness. Some looked human. Others decidedly did not. "This is now your home," Sebastien said quietly, and the words landed with the weight of a life sentence. He led me through corridors that seemed to twist in ways that defied geometry, turning left 3 times yet somehow ending up on a different floor entirely. Servants appeared and vanished like ghosts. Some human, some not, all silent as graves. They bowed to Sebastien without speaking, their eyes sliding over me with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Finally, we reached a pair of doors carved with images of roses and thorns so realistic I half expected them to draw blood. Sebastien pushed them open, revealing a study that stole what little breath I had left. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, showing all of Thornwick spread below like a map come to life. I could see the Vale Wall dividing the city, the Crimson Lotus still lit with celebration, the harbor where my family's ships had once dominated trade. From this height it all looked small, insignificant, a mortal world that suddenly seemed very far away. The room itself was filled with books, thousands of them in languages I recognized and many I didn't, bound in leather and cloth and what might have been skin. A fireplace carved from black marble held blue flames that cast dancing shadows. 2 chairs faced each other across a low table, and it was to these that Sebastien gestured. "Sit." It wasn't a command quite, but it wasn't a request either. I remained standing. "What game are you playing?" The words burst out of me, all the shock and confusion of the past hour crystallizing into anger. "What do you want from me?" Sebastien moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, crystal so fine they looked like frozen water. "You deserve answers." He poured, the wine catching the firelight like liquid rubies. "And I will give them to you. But perhaps you should sit first." "I don't want wine. I want the truth." "The truth is long and complicated and will be easier to hear if you're not standing." He held out one of the glasses. Mortal wine, I should note. Not blood, not poison, not enchanted. Simply wine. I took it, more to have something to hold than from any desire to drink. But I sat, perching on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee. Sebastien settled across from me with the fluid grace of a predator at rest. "There is a prophecy," he began. 8 centuries old, spoken by an oracle whose bones are now dust. She foretold that a mortal woman bearing the Hale bloodline would either doom or redeem the vampire realm. I wanted to laugh. Wanted to throw the wine in his face and demand real answers, not fairy tales. Something in his expression stopped me. He looked old suddenly despite his ageless face. Old and tired and sincere. "The prophecy was specific," he continued. "This woman would be cast down by her own kind, humiliated before witnesses, her family name turned to ash. In that moment of breaking, she would either rise as our salvation or fall as our destruction." So this was manipulation. My voice came out flat cold. "You needed a prophetic bride and I was convenient. You watched me be humiliated and saw an opportunity to collect your designated savior. I needed what fate demanded." Sebastien leaned forward, his crimson eyes intense. "But I chose to intervene when I saw you standing there, wearing humiliation like armor, refusing to break even as your world collapsed. That part was mine alone. The prophecy said you would exist. It did not say I would claim you. That choice was personal. Why?" I demanded. "Why claim me at all? Why not just watch? See if your prophecy came true? Because 800 years ago, I made a promise to a dying woman that I would recognize her when she returned." His voice went soft, distant. "And tonight I did." Before I could respond, the wine glass slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Images flooded my mind like a dam breaking. A woman who looked like me but wasn't. Same brown eyes, same bone structure, but her hair was longer, darker, her clothing medieval and rough spun. She was running through these halls, laughing, her hand caught in Sebastian's as they fled from something. The smile was different then. Young somehow despite immortality. Less burdened. The image shifted. The same woman in a gown of deep green, standing before a crowd of humans and vampires alike, speaking words I couldn't hear but could feel. Words of peace, of unity, of bridges between worlds. Another shift. Blood on marble floors. The woman dying in Sebastian's arms, her hand reaching up to touch his face. Her lips moving. I will return and you will know me and we will finish what we began. I gasped, the vision shattering as I found myself on my knees on Sebastian's study floor, shattered crystal around me, wine soaking into burgundy silk. Seeing her. Sebastian was beside me somehow, his hand steadying my shoulder. Marguerite. First Clara Hale. It's not possible. But even as I said it, I knew it was. The memories, if that's what they were, felt as real as my own childhood, my own history. She was a mortal woman I loved 8 centuries ago, Sebastian said quietly, helping me to a chair. A merchant's daughter like you. A keeper of records like you. She saw the hatred growing between our peoples and tried to stop it. She nearly succeeded. What happened? War happened. Betrayal. She stood between armies and paid the price for it. His jaw tightened. I held her as she died. Her last words were a curse and a blessing both. That she would return, that I would know her, that we would finish what we began. And you think I'm her. It should have sounded absurd. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place, like a key finding a lock after centuries of searching. I know you are. Or were. Or carry her soul. The terminology doesn't matter. He knelt before me, bringing his eyes level with mine. The prophecy and my personal history are intertwined, Clara. You are both the woman foretold and the woman I lost. Your bloodline doom will save us. Your choices will determine which. If I'm her reincarnation, do I have her memories? Not yet. But they're waking. I can see it in your eyes. Recognition you shouldn't have, knowledge that isn't yours but is. He paused. It will get stronger. More vivid. More overwhelming. I'm not a pawn in your ancient chess game. I stood, needing distance, needing air. I'm not some prophesied savior or reborn lost love. I'm Clara Hale, and 3 hours ago I was a humiliated archivist with a shattered engagement and a family name worth less than dirt. No. Sebastian rose as well, and despite everything, despite the fear and confusion, his presence was steadying rather than threatening. You're the queen. The most powerful piece on the board. And the most vulnerable. A sharp knock interrupted whatever I might have said. Theron, the mountain of a guard from the ballroom, entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. My lord. Lord Calvern has called an emergency council meeting. The nobles are furious about the mortal bride. They demand an explanation. Sebastian's expression hardened. Of course they do. Turn to me. Stay in these chambers. The citadel is dangerous for mortals who wander, especially now. Especially you. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back. I will protect you, Clara. But I cannot promise you will not come to hate me for what I've dragged you into. Then he was gone, and I was alone in a vampire king's study, wearing a dead woman's face and a ring that bound me to prophecies and promises 8 centuries deep. I looked down at my hand. The ring's stone pulsed with inner light, and as I watched, images swirled in its depths, battles and coronations, love and loss, endings and beginnings that hadn't yet come to pass. Whatever I had been before tonight was gone. Whatever I would become started now. And despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the impossibility of it all, I felt something stirring in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The vampire council chamber smelled of old blood and older grudges. I shouldn't have been there. Sebastian had told me to stay in his study, to wait, to be safe. But I'd spent my entire life being told where to belong, and I was done with obedience. If I was supposedly some prophesied queen, some reincarnated savior, then I needed to understand exactly what I'd been claimed for. The corridors had twisted and turned, but the ring on my finger had grown warm whenever I chose correctly, guiding me like a compass toward its master. Servants had passed me without acknowledgement, as though I were already part of the citadel's shadows. Perhaps I was. I found the council chamber by following the sound of raised voices, and slipped into the upper gallery, a narrow balcony hidden behind stone lacework that allowed observation without participation. perfect for spies or unwanted brides. Below, 12 vampire nobles sat in a circle around a table carved from a single piece of obsidian. Sebastien occupied the head, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, tracking each speaker with predatory focus. The chamber itself was ancient, the walls decorated with symbols that predated any language I knew, the air thick with power that made my skin prickle. This is madness. The speaker was a vampire who looked to be in his 60s, though his eyes betrayed centuries more. White hair fell to his shoulders, elegant and severe. His clothing was immaculate, deep purple velvet that screamed old wealth and older power. You bring a mortal into our inner circle, claim her as queen consort, and expect us to simply accept this aberration? Lord Calverin. Sebastian's voice was patient, almost amused. Your concerns are noted. Noted but not addressed. Calverin stood, his movements fluid despite his apparent age. The Veiled Treaty exists for a reason, my king. Separation protects both our peoples. Bringing a mortal bride here, bestowing upon her the royal ring, granting her access to our most sacred spaces. It violates every principle we've maintained for generations. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles. A woman with silver eyes and midnight skin nodded sharply. A younger vampire, though still likely centuries old, leaned forward with obvious interest. The prophecy, Sebastien began, but Calverin cut him off with a dismissive gesture. The prophecy is superstition. 800-year-old mysticism that has no bearing on modern governance. His smile was sharp. The king mistakes infatuation for destiny. We all remember Marguerite, my lord. We remember how that ended. The name hung in the air like an accusation. I felt it resonate in my chest, in the ring on my finger, in memories that weren't quite mine yet felt intimately familiar. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something in the room's temperature dropped several degrees. You will not speak her name as though it were a weakness. But it was, wasn't it? Calverin pressed. You loved a mortal woman and it nearly destroyed our people. Now you repeat history, claiming another Hale girl, binding yourself to prophecy and sentiment when we need strength and clarity. Other nobles spoke then, their concerns pouring out in overlapping voices. Mortals were fragile, temporary, easily broken. A mortal queen would be a security risk, vulnerable to assassination, kidnapping, manipulation. The mortal aristocracy was already spreading rumor of enchantment. The Veiled Treaty was straining under the weight of this unprecedented breach. Through it all, Sebastien remained calm, listening with the patience of someone who had weathered centuries of political maneuvering. The bloodline returns, he said finally, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The prophecy has protected us for 800 years. It has kept our people safe, our realm stable, our magic strong. We honor it or we break the covenant that shields us all. Then test her. Calverin's words fell like stones into still water. If she's truly blessed by prophecy, if she's truly the one foretold, let her survive the trials of worth. The room fell silent. The trials of worth. Even in the archives, references to them were sparse, coded, terrifying. Ancient challenges designed to test vampire heirs before they could ascend to positions of power. 3 trials. Mind, body, spirit. Only the strongest, most gifted vampires survived them. Most who attempted them died in ways that made death seem merciful. No mortal had ever faced them. No mortal could. Absolutely not. Sebastian's voice was ice. She is under my protection. I will not sacrifice her to appease your doubt. And your people will not accept her. Calverin spread his hands as though the conclusion were obvious. She will be seen as a pet, my king. A curiosity. A weakness to exploit. But if she survives the trials, if she proves herself by our own ancient standards. He smiled. Then even I would bow to her as queen. I said no. With respect, your majesty, the silver-eyed woman spoke up, her voice cool and measured. Lord Calverin speaks truth. The court will never accept a mortal bride who has not earned her place. But if she is truly prophesied, truly the one who will doom or redeem us, should she not prove it? The trials kill, Sebastien said flatly. They're designed to push vampires to the brink of destruction. A mortal. I accept. My voice rang out from the gallery, surprising me as much as it did them. 12 vampire faces snapped upward, crimson and amber and silver eyes locking onto me with varying degrees of shock and hunger. Sebastian's face showed fury and fear in equal measure. I descended the stairs, my legs steadier than I expected, my chin high despite the terror coursing through my veins. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to let Sebastian protect me. But I'd been protected by men before. I'd been Julian's charity case, my father's disappointing daughter, my family's last shameful remnant. I was done being protected. I accept the trials, I repeated, stopping at the edge of the obsidian table. 12 ancient vampires and one furious king stared at me. If I'm to be your queen, I must earn it myself. Not hide behind your crown, not rely on prophecy, not be dismissed as a pet or a weakness. I met Calverin's eyes. I've been underestimated my entire life. By all means, make the same mistake. The chamber erupted in shock and speculation. Sebastian rose, his expression thunderous, but Calverin smiled like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. The mortal has spirit, he said. Very well. 3 days hence the trials begin. Let us see if prophecy or pride serves her better. Sebastian's private chambers were somehow both more intimate and more terrifying than his study. The bedroom was dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in midnight velvet, though I suspected he never actually slept. Weapons lined one wall, swords and daggers that looked ancient and deadly. Books filled another, creating a fortress of knowledge around what might have been vulnerability. He rounded on me the moment Theron closed the door behind us. You have no idea what you've agreed to. His voice was barely controlled rage. These trials kill Clara. They're designed to break vampires who've lived centuries. They're mortal, fragile human. I've been dead for years. The words came out bitter and raw. Julian just made it official. At least this death means something. This is not martyrdom. He paced like a caged predator. This is suicide dressed up as honor. Then teach me. I stepped into his path, forcing him to stop. Said I have 3 days. Then use them. Teach me everything you know about vampires, about your weaknesses, about how to survive. There is no surviving the trials of worth for a mortal. Then I'll be the first. I grabbed his arm, feeling the cool strength beneath the fabric. I will not be your weakness, Sebastian. I will not be the thing they used to destroy you. Either I earn their respect or I die trying. Those are the only options left. The fury in his eyes slowly gave way to something else. Resignation, perhaps, or recognition. You sound like her. Marguerite. She was just as stubborn, just as willing to throw herself into fire for principle. And you loved her. And I lost her. He pulled away, moving to the window. If you die in these trials, I will raise the world that made you feel you had to prove yourself. Then don't let me die. I moved to stand beside him, looking out over the sleeping city. Teach me to win. For a long moment we stood in silence. Then Sebastian sighed, the sound carrying 8 centuries of weariness. 3 days. I'll teach you everything I can. We worked through the night. Sebastian explained vampire physiology with clinical precision. Their enhanced strength and speed, their vulnerability to silver and sunlight, the way their senses could overwhelm mortal perception. He taught me about vampire politics, the intricate hierarchy of the night court, the factions that jockeyed for power beneath the veneer of civility. He described the trials in detail that made my blood run cold. The trial of mind, which manifested your deepest fears and traumas. The trial of body, where you faced a vampire warrior in single combat. The trial of spirit, which no one would explain fully because most who entered it never came out. As the hours passed, our conversation drifted from tactics to history, from strategy to stories. He told me about Marguerite, about how she'd seen beauty in monsters and humanity in immortals. I told him about my family's fall, about the slow grinding poverty that had replaced our wealth, about Julian's false promises. At some point we'd moved closer. I couldn't say when it happened, only that I looked up from a diagram of vampire nerve points and found him inches away, his crimson eyes searching my face with an intensity that had nothing to do with teaching. You should rest, he said quietly, though dawn was still hours away. Tomorrow we begin physical training. I'm not tired. Liar. But there was warmth in the word. His hand lifted, almost touching my face, then stopped. His fingers hovered near my cheek, so close I could feel the coolness of him without contact. I cannot afford to care too deeply. Not again. Not with what's coming. Too late. I reached up, covering his suspended hand with mine, pressing it against my face. His skin was cool but not cold, solid proof that this nightmare was real. I see it in your eyes. He pulled back as though burned. Clara. A sharp knock interrupted whatever he might have said. A servant entered, a young woman with scales along her neck and fear in her amber eyes. My lord. Urgent news from the city. Julian Ashford has been seen meeting with known vampire rebels in the Shadow Market. The mortal aristocracy is demanding answers about the engagement, claiming you've enchanted Lady Clara. And she hesitated. It's been a theft from the royal vaults. Ancient artifacts are missing. Sebastian's expression went from concerned to grave. Which artifacts? Components for blood magic rituals, my lord. Theron suspects a traitor within the citadel. The room felt suddenly colder. Sebastien exchanged a look with me, and I saw the calculations happening behind his eyes. The trials, he said slowly. They may be a distraction from a larger plot. Or a trap, I added, the pieces falling into place. Calvin suggested them awfully quickly. Either way, we have 3 days. Sebastien dismissed the servant with a gesture. Get them rest, Clara. Tomorrow we'll prepare for war dressed as trials. I returned to the guest chambers I'd been assigned. The suite was larger than my entire apartment in Immortal City, decorated in burgundy and silver that I tried not to read as prophetic. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind raced with everything I'd learned. I stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the pre-dawn air, and that's when I saw it. A dead raven lay on the stone railing, its neck broken, its feathers scattered. Pinned to its chest with a silver needle was a note, written in something dark that could only be blood. Some mortals should stay dead. The ring on my finger burned cold as ice, and somewhere in the citadel, I heard a clock begin to toll the hours until my trial by fire. They dressed me for the trials in white, the color of sacrifice. The gown was simple, undyed silk that felt like water against my skin, no embroidery, no decoration save silver threading at the hem that formed symbols I didn't recognize. Ancient protective wards, Sebastien had explained, though he'd looked doubtful about their efficacy. My hair was left unbound, falling down my back like a dark river. No jewelry except the ring on my finger, which pulsed with steady warmth. I looked like a bride, or a lamb being led to slaughter. The distinction felt increasingly meaningless. It's not too late to refuse, Sebastien said quietly as we walked through corridors lined with vampire nobles who gathered to witness either my triumph or my destruction. Most looked hungry for the latter. Yes, it is. I kept my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. The moment I accepted, I sealed my fate. Vampire law, remember? You taught me that. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. We'd argued until dawn about his plan to enter the third trial with me. I'd forbidden it. He'd ignored me. We'd reached the kind of impasse that comes from two stubborn people caring too much about each other's survival. The Chamber of Echoes waited at the end of a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. The door was silver, carved with faces twisted in expressions of terror and ecstasy. It opened without touch, swinging inward to reveal a circular room where every surface was mirror. Floor, walls, ceiling, all reflecting glass that caught the blue moonfire from sconces and multiplied it into infinity. I stepped inside, and the door sealed behind me with the finality of a tomb closing. For a moment, there was only silence, and my reflection repeated endlessly in every direction. Then the mirrors began to move. My father's face appeared first, his expression carved from disappointment. You've destroyed us, the reflection said in his voice. Everything we built, everything we were, reduced to nothing because you weren't strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough. My mother materialized beside him, tears streaming down her face. We had to flee because of you. Had to abandon our home, our life, our dignity. All because you failed us. I knew they weren't real. Knew this was the trial, manifesting my deepest fears, my greatest shames. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The mirror shifted. Julian appeared, Vivian on his arm, both of them laughing. Did you really think I could love you? His voice dripped contempt. You were pathetic, Clara. A charity case. I kept you around because you made me look generous. So desperate, Vivian added, her smile sharp as knives. So eager to believe someone could want the broken daughter of a broken family. The images grew more visceral. I watched my family's ships burn in harbor. Watched bailiffs strip our house of furniture while neighbors gathered to gossip. Watched my young self crying alone in an empty room, surrounded by the ghosts of better days. You failed them, the mirror whispered in 1,000 voices. Failed everyone. You'll fail here too. You'll die, and Sebastien will lose another woman he loved. And it will be your fault, your weakness, your insufficiency. Then the image changed. A woman who looked like me but wasn't stood in the same chamber 800 years ago. Marguerite, dressed in medieval clothing, facing mirrors that showed her own fears. But she was smiling, fierce and unafraid. Her voice echoed through the chamber, through time itself. Fear is a memory. Choose which memories give you power. I saw through her eyes then, felt what she'd felt. She'd been terrified too, but she'd chosen to remember different things. Not her failures, but her survivals. Not her losses, but her resilience. Not the time she'd fallen, but the time she'd stood back up. We are echoes of the same song, you and I, Marguerite's voice whispered. Sing louder than I could. I closed my eyes, blocking out the mirrors and their cruel reflections. I remembered Sebastien's words from our training. You survived everything that tried to break you. That's not weakness. That's a threat. I remembered standing in the Crimson Lotus, humiliated before hundreds and choosing to keep my chin high. I remembered defying vampire nobles and accepting trials that should kill me. I remembered that I was still here, still standing, still fighting. When I opened my eyes, I looked at my reflection, not at my failures behind it. I survived, I told myself, and my voice carried through the chamber with unexpected strength. Every betrayal, every loss, every moment they tried to make you small. You survived it all. That doesn't make you weak. I stepped closer to the mirror, meeting my own gaze. That makes you dangerous. The chamber exploded. Mirrors shattered in a cascade of silver fragments that dissolved into light before they could touch me. The blue moonfire flared brilliant white, then settled back to its usual glow. The door opened, revealing the corridor beyond where vampire nobles stood in shocked silence. I walked out, white silk untouched, head high. Lord Calverin's expression was unreadable. The trial of mind is past. Unusual for a mortal to manage it on the first attempt. I'm an unusual mortal. I met his eyes without flinching. Shall we continue? Crimson Arena was exactly what its name suggested. An ancient fighting pit deep beneath the citadel, where the walls and floor were stained rust-red from centuries of blood. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows that made the space feel alive, hungry. The vampire nobles filled stone seating that ringed the arena, a Roman Colosseum built for immortal entertainment. Sebastien sat in a throne-like chair carved from bone, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the armrests. Theron entered from the opposite side and my heart sank. The mountain of a vampire who'd guarded Sebastien at the Crimson Lotus looked even more massive here, his muscles outlined by fighting leather that had seen centuries of combat. He held a practice sword, wood, not steel, a concession to my mortality. His expression was miserable. I've requested a substitution, he called out, his voice carrying to the nobles above. I don't fight mortals. It is beneath the honor of these trials. Request denied, Calverin's voice echoed from the shadows. Tradition demands the king's champion face the claimant. You serve the king. Therefore you fight. Theron looked at me and I saw genuine regret in his silver eyes. I will try not to kill you. Try harder than that. I picked up my own practice sword, feeling its weight, remembering everything Sebastien had taught me about vampire combat. They relied on overwhelming speed and strength, expecting opponents to crumble under the onslaught. My advantages were smaller size, unpredictability, and the kind of desperate creativity that comes from having absolutely nothing to lose. 3 minutes, the arbiter announced. The mortal need only survive. The gong sounded. Theron moved like lightning, crossing the arena before I could blink. His sword came down in an arc that would have split me in half if it connected. I dove sideways, rolling through sand that got in my eyes, my mouth, everywhere. He was pulling his punches. I could tell by the way he hesitated, by how his strikes were measured rather than instinctive. But even his restrained attacks were faster, stronger, more skilled than anything I could match. I scrambled to my feet, swung wildly, and he blocked without effort. His riposte came too fast to see, the wooden blade catching my ribs and sending me sprawling. Pain exploded through my side. Something cracked. I tasted blood. Stay down, Theron said quietly. The crowd above was shouting, demanding more violence, more entertainment. Please, Lady Clara. Stay down. I pushed myself up, using the sword as a crutch. Not how this works. The next exchange was worse. He was faster now, pushed by the crowd's bloodlust, and I was slower, hindered by injured ribs and growing exhaustion. His blade found my shoulder, my thigh, my forearm. Each impact was carefully controlled but devastating nonetheless. I was losing. Going to die here, killed by a vampire who didn't even want to hurt me, while hundreds watched and Sebastien sat powerless in his throne. Then I remembered something he'd said during training. Vampires are apex predators. They've forgotten what it means to fight dirty. When Theron came at me again, I didn't try to block or dodge. I scooped up a handful of sand and threw it directly into his face. He recoiled, momentarily blinded, and I kicked the back of his knee as hard as I could. He dropped, more from surprise than pain, and I swung my sword at his head, not to strike, but to tangle in the chain that hung from a nearby bracket. The chain wrapped around the blade and I pulled, yanking it free and swinging it like a whip. The heavy links caught Theron across the chest, forcing him back. For 10 seconds, I had the advantage of pure, desperate unpredictability. Then he recovered and I knew I was dead. He moved faster than thought, disarming me with contemptuous ease. His hand closed around my throat, lifting me off my feet. Fangs descended, getting close to my throat, and the crowd roared its approval. This was it. The end. I'd survived mind but failed body. Your king needs me alive, I whispered, each word agony. I hope you do too. Theron froze. His fangs were millimeters from my skin, close enough that I felt the sharp points. His eyes met mine and I saw the war happening behind them. Duty to tradition versus loyalty to Sebastien. He hesitated. I brought my knee up into his stomach with everything I had left. It did nothing to hurt him, but it broke his grip. I dropped, rolled, and somehow got my hand on the fallen sword just as the final gong sounded. 3 minutes. I'd survived. I collapsed onto the blood-stained sand, gasping for air through broken ribs. Every part of me hurt. But I was alive. Theron helped me stand, supporting most of my weight. You fight like someone with nothing to lose. I don't. I coughed, tasted blood. That's why I'll win. His laugh was surprised and genuine. The king chose well. You have a warrior's heart. The vampire nobles were silent as I limped from the arena. Theron supporting me. Only when I reached the exit did I hear it. Scattered applause growing louder, till even some of the most skeptical were acknowledging what I'd done. I'd survived. Against all odds, against all expectation, I'd survived. 2 trials down. 1 to go. They took me to recovery chambers where healers worked with herbs and poultices that did little for injuries this severe. I was drifting in and out of consciousness when Sebastien arrived, protocol be damned. Out, he ordered the healers. They fled. He knelt beside me, his cool hands infinitely gentle as they assessed my injuries. You should never have had to do this. I had to prove myself. Each word hurt. Can't be your weakness. You're not my weakness. He bit his wrist without hesitation, blood welling dark and rich. You're my strength. Every drop of your blood spilled is a wound I feel. He brought his wrist to my lips, and I understood what he was offering. Vampire blood healed mortals, but it was also deeply intimate, sharing life force, creating bonds that transcended physical touch. Then feel it, I whispered before I drank. Feel me. Stop treating me like a ghost. His blood was cool and strange, tasting of copper and midnight and something indefinable. It burned going down and spread through my veins like liquid fire. My broken ribs knitted themselves together. Cuts sealed. Bruises faded. Within moments I was whole again, stronger even than before. Our eyes met, and the air between us crackled with unspoken tension. Why didn't you tell me Marguerite also faced these trials? I asked. His expression shuddered. Because she failed the 3rd one. It killed her. The words hung heavy between us. What is the trial of spirit? It's not just facing your soul. Facing the soul you were, the soul you are, and the soul you'll become. All 3 simultaneously in the soul forge where time has no meaning. He looked away. For a reincarnated being, it's especially dangerous. You'll face Marguerite directly, and one of you may not survive the encounter. You're terrified of losing me the same way you lost her. Yes. Simple, honest, raw. I reached up, touching his face, feeling the coolness of his skin and the warmth beneath. And give me a reason to fight harder than she did. He leaned into my touch, his eyes falling closed. Clara, congratulations on surviving thus far. We sprang apart as Calvin entered without knocking, his smile sharp as broken glass. 2 trials passed. Most impressive for a mortal. The 3rd begins at midnight. Few who enter the Soul Forge emerge. Fewer still emerge unchanged. After he left, Sebastien and I searched my chambers. We found evidence of someone rifling through my belongings. Worse, we found the stolen artifacts hidden beneath my bed, ancient relics that pulsed with dark power. The rite of unmaking, Sebastien breathed, his face going pale. These are the components needed to sever prophecies, to break magical bonds. If someone performed this during your trial, it could kill me and shatter the prophecy protection. I finished. The trials were a trap all along. You can't withdraw. Vampire law won't allow it. His hands clenched into fists. But I can enter the trial with you. The law forbids interference, but not participation. You'd risk yourself for me? He pulled me close, his forehead pressing against mine. Clara, I've risked myself for you across 8 centuries. What's one more night? Outside the window, the moon began its climb toward midnight. The final trial awaited. Midnight came wearing the face of every fear I'd ever buried. Descent into the Soul Forge took us deeper than I'd thought possible, down spiral stairs carved directly into the mountain heart. The air grew thick with age and power, each breath tasting of stone and secrets. Torches burned with that eerie blue moon fire. Even their light seemed reluctant here, pressed back by shadows that had weight and presence. Sebastien walked beside me, our hands occasionally brushing. Each touch sent sparks through the ring on my finger, as though the ancient silver recognized that we were walking toward either destiny or destruction. Last chance to refuse, he said, though we both knew it was too late. We do this together. I squeezed his hand once, briefly. Whatever happens. The Soul Forge chamber predated the citadel itself. Possibly predated the city, the kingdom, perhaps even the current age of the world. The walls were carved with symbols and languages that hurt to look at, characters that writhed and shifted when viewed directly. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, so complete it felt less like absence of light and more like the presence of void. At the chamber's center sat a pool of liquid that defied description. It looked like molten starlight, silver and luminous, but also like liquid shadow, dark and consuming. It was both and neither, and staring at it made my eyes water and my head ache. The vampire court filled stone galleries above, their faces pale moons looking down at the arena of our trial. I spotted Calvin in the front row, his expression serene, satisfied. Like a man watching a plan come to fruition. An ancient vampire, older even than Calvin, his skin like parchment stretched over bone, spoke in a voice that echoed despite the chamber's vast space. Trial of spirit. Enter the Soul Forge. Face what you were, what you are, what you will become. Emerge transformed or not at all. He paused, frowning at Sebastien. The king's participation is unprecedented, but not forbidden by ancient law. Both may enter. Both will be tested. Sebastien and I approached the pool's edge. Up close, the liquid seemed to breathe, rising and falling in a rhythm that matched no heartbeat I'd ever heard. Together, they said. Until the end of time, he replied. I stepped into the pool. The liquid wasn't hot or cold. It was sensation itself, overwhelming and incomprehensible. It felt like dissolving, like every molecule of my being was coming apart and scattering to the cosmic winds. I tried to scream but had no mouth. Tried to reach for Sebastien but had no hand. Reality fragmented into 1,000 shards of mirror glass, each reflecting a different truth. Then I was falling through time itself. I landed in a memory that wasn't mine but felt as intimate as my own heartbeat. Marguerite stood in a merchant's shop, counting inventory by candlelight. She was younger than I'd been when Julian humiliated me, perhaps 23, 24, with the same brown eyes, same determined set to her jaw. But her hands were rougher, her clothing simpler, her world smaller. The memory shifted and I saw her first meeting with Sebastien. Not in a ballroom but in a forest at twilight, where she'd gotten lost searching for herbs her mother needed. He'd appeared like a shadow given form, dangerous and beautiful, and instead of running she'd asked him to show her the way home. I watched their courtship unfold in accelerated moments. Secret meetings, stolen kisses, the slow building of trust between mortal and immortal. Watched Marguerite face the trials of worth 8 centuries ago, passing mind and body just as I had. Saw her joy when Sebastien gave her the ring, the same ring now on my finger. Then the betrayal. Calvin, younger but no less elegant, stirring discord between vampire and mortal factions. Planting evidence of broken treaties. Orchestrating raids and reprisals. Building toward a war that would cement vampire supremacy and eliminate the dangerous idea that mortals and immortals could ever be equals. Marguerite discovered his plot. Tried to expose it. Stood between armies on a blood-soaked field and begged them to see reason. I watched her die and it was worse than my earlier vision. Calvin's blade, silver and poison-coated, struck from behind, severing her spine and pumping venom designed to destroy not just body but soul. A weapon meant to prevent reincarnation, to erase her completely from the cycle of existence. But it failed. Marguerite's will was too strong, her purpose too fierce. As she died in Sebastien's arms, her soul scattered rather than dissipated, fragments hiding across centuries, waiting for the moment they could coalesce again. Waiting to become me. You see it now. Marguerite stood before me, spirit to spirit, both of us existing in this place between life and death. Calvin feared unity. He killed me to prevent the realms from joining. And now he's trying again. You're me, I said, though it felt more complicated than that. I was you. You are me. We are echoes of the same song, separated by time. She smiled, and it was like looking in a mirror that showed truth rather than reflection. But you are also yourself, Clara. You have lived your own life, survived your own trials, forged your own strength. She reached out, and when our hands touched, I felt 8 centuries of accumulated knowledge flood into me. Vampire politics, blood magic theory, the hidden passages of the Citadel, the names of allies and enemies, the structure of ancient prophecies. Everything Marguerite had known, everything she'd learned, everything she'd planned to use to unite the realms. Take my memories, she said, her form beginning to fade, but keep your fire. I loved him with a mortal heart, brief and burning. You must love him with an eternal one. I don't understand. You will. She was disappearing, dissolving back into the starlight. Finish what we began, Clara. Be the bridge I couldn't be. And don't let Calvin win. The knowledge settled into my mind like it had always been there. Memories that were mine and not mine. A lifetime lived 8 centuries ago becoming as familiar as yesterday. When I opened my eyes, if I'd ever closed them, I understood everything. Sebastien was drowning in memory. He relived every moment with Marguerite in excruciating detail. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered promise. Then he lived 8 centuries after, each year of fate pressing down on him. The loneliness that calcified into numbness. The hope that slowly decayed into acceptance. The waiting that never ended. Soul Forge showed him futures, each one crystalline and possible. Clara surviving, growing old while he stayed frozen in time. Watching her wither, her vibrant spirit dimming with age, her eyes losing their fire. Burying her and waiting for her to return again, an endless cycle of love and loss. Clara transformed into a vampire, immortal at his side. But cold, different, the humanity that made her special stripped away. Living forever but losing the warmth that made life worth living. Clara released, living a mortal life far from him. Happy perhaps with someone who could grow old beside her. While he remained alone, watching from darkness, sacrificing his heart for her happiness. Clara dead like Marguerite, the prophecy broken, the cycle continuing. Another 8 centuries of waiting, another reincarnation, another chance to fail. What do you choose? Soul Forge demanded in a voice that was every voice, no voice, the sound of eternity asking questions that already knew the answers to. I choose her choice. Sebastien's voice was steady despite the grief crushing his chest. Whatever she decides, I will honor it. Even if it destroys me. Even death. Especially death. He thought of Clara. Fierce, broken, resilient Clara who'd faced every trial with her chin high and her heart open. I will not cage her in immortality to ease my loneliness. If she chooses to leave, I'll let her go. If she chooses to stay as she is, I'll treasure every mortal moment. If she chooses transformation, I'll ensure she never loses herself. The trial pressed. And if she chooses you? and I'll spend eternity proving I was worthy of that choice. The soul forge hummed with something that might have been approval. You have learned, Sebastien Vale. You have grown. The trial is past. We surfaced together, gasping as though breaking through water, though there was no water to breathe. I was on my hands and knees at the pool's edge, Sebastien beside me, both of us shaking from the intensity of what we'd experienced. When I looked up, I knew my eyes had changed. I could feel it. Marguerite's memories integrated fully now, her knowledge mine, her purpose mine. Silver flecks sparkled in my brown eyes, visible even in the blue moonfire. I stood, every eye in the gallery fixed on me, and pointed directly at Calvin. You killed her. My voice carried across the chamber with absolute certainty. You killed Marguerite. Poisoned her with a soul-severing blade to prevent her from uniting the realms. The court erupted in shock and denial. Calvin remained seated, utterly calm, one eyebrow raised in polite skepticism. Prove it. Your visions in the soul forge mean nothing. Spirit trials show fears and fantasies as easily as truth. I have her memories. All of them. I smiled, sharp and dangerous, including where she hid the evidence of your treachery. I led them through the citadel, Marguerite's knowledge guiding my steps through passages I'd never walked but remembered perfectly. Behind the throne room, hidden in a wall that looked solid but wasn't, I found the sealed chamber. Inside, Calvin's journals spanning centuries. Detailed plans written in his elegant script. Marguerite's assassination. Decades of manipulation. The vault thefts. Framing me. Every piece of his conspiracy laid bare. You orchestrated everything, Sebastien said, his voice deadly quiet. The war that killed Marguerite. The prophecy's suppression. The rebellion stirring now. You planned to use the right of unmaking during Clara's trial. Kill her, frame me, and seize power in the resulting chaos. Calvin's serene mask finally cracked. He stood and centuries of rage poured out. You were never supposed to complete the trials. You were supposed to die, shatter the prophecy, and free us from this ridiculous notion that mortals and immortals could ever coexist as equals. Why? I demanded. Why fear unity so much? Because unity means vulnerability. He was shouting now, all pretense abandoned. Mortals are weak, temporary, liability. You make our immortal king weak with sentiment, with compassion, with humanity. You're a disease. No. I stepped forward, Sebastien at my side. We make him human. That's what terrifies you. You'd rather rule through fear than love, through isolation than connection. You'd rather be strong and alone than vulnerable and together. Calvin's smile was pure venom. Noble words. But they won't save you. He moved faster than thought, pulling artifacts from his robes. The stolen components of the rite of unmaking. He must have brought them to the trial, hidden them around the soul forge while we were trapped inside. Dark energy erupted from the pool. Black lightning tasted of endings and erasure. The ritual was activating, designed to unmake prophecies, sever bonds, destroy both Clara and Sebastien by breaking the connection between their souls. The Empire nobles fled screaming. The walls cracked, ancient symbols burning with malevolent light. Sebastien and I moved instinctively, standing back to back as dark energy swirled around us like a cyclone. Together. I gasped, reaching for his hand. Until the end of time, he replied, his fingers lacing with mine. The ring on my finger blazed silver white, responding to the threat. Sebastien's power surged through our joined hands. 8 centuries of accumulated strength, of vampire magic, of immortal will. My own power rose to meet it. The prophecy's blessing, Marguerite's memories, a mortal heart that refused to break. Our combined energy exploded outward. A surge of light that met the darkness and held it at bay. But Calvin was old, powerful, prepared. The rite of unmaking pressed closer, unraveling the edges of our souls, threatening to tear apart everything we were and could be. I will not lose you again, Sebastien said through gritted teeth. Then we win together, I replied, or fall together. No other option. We poured everything we had into that moment. Love, rage, hope, determination, 8 centuries of waiting and 3 days of fighting. The prophecy responded, ancient magic recognizing its moment. And our joined power became something new, something unprecedented. The darkness screamed as light consumed it. They say love is the death of beauty, but in that moment love was the birth of kingdoms. Our joined power held the darkness at bay, but barely. Calverin's right of unmaking pressed against our defenses like a living thing, seeking weaknesses, probing for cracks in our resolve. Soul-forged chamber shook, ancient stone groaning under forces it was never meant to contain. Then Calvin laughed, and the sound's triumph mixed with madness. "Did you think I worked alone?" He gestured, and 6 vampire nobles stepped forward from the galleries, conspirators who'd hidden in plain sight for centuries. "We've been poisoning this court against mortals for generations, planting distrust, nurturing fear, ensuring that when the moment came, enough of us would stand together to finish what I began 800 years ago." The chamber erupted into chaos. Theron roared a battle cry and launched himself at the nearest traitor, sword singing as it cleared its sheath. Loyal guards clashed with conspirators in brutal combat that moved faster than mortal eyes could follow. The vampire court scattered, nobles fleeing or choosing sides as centuries-old alliances shattered in moments. Sebastien released my hand and I felt the loss like a wound. But he had to. Calvin was moving toward us with the focused intent of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. We met in the center of the chamber, and their fight was terrifying in its ancient brutality. These weren't vampires playing at combat. These were immortals who'd perfected killing over lifetimes. Sebastien moved like water and lightning, each strike precisely calculated. Calvin fought with the cruel efficiency of 12 centuries of existence, his elegant facade finally stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. I stood at the edge of the right's dark energy, feeling it pulse and writhe. Marguerite's memories showed me something Calvin had missed. The rite of unmaking wasn't just destructive. It was revelatory. It didn't simply unmake. It revealed fundamental truths and remade reality based on those truths. Calvin had intended it to unmake prophecies. He'd misunderstood the ritual's true nature. It couldn't unmake what was true. It could only expose lies and burn them away. "Sebastien!" I shouted over the din of battle. "Keep him away from me." Understanding flashed in his eyes. He drove Calvin back with a flurry of strikes that would have killed any lesser vampire, giving me the seconds I needed. I stepped into the center of the ritual. The dark energy hit me like a tidal wave, trying to tear me apart at the seams. Every cell in my body screamed. But I held firm, drawing on Marguerite's memories, on the prophecy's blessing, my own stubborn refusal to break. "What was scattered shall unite." I spoke the words of the original prophecy, feeling them resonate through the ritual's energy. "What was broken shall bind. What was ending shall begin." The darkness exploded outward. It wasn't destruction. It was truth, raw and undeniable, forcing itself on everyone in the chamber. Calvin's conspirators were revealed in stark clarity. Their crimes, their manipulations, centuries of lies exposed for all to see. Vampire nobles gasped as they witnessed memories of orchestrated conflicts, false flag attacks, evidence planted and destroyed. Systematic poisoning of trust between mortal and immortal. But the ritual showed more than Calvin's conspiracy. It revealed history itself, truth buried under centuries of convenient lies. Ancient times when vampires and mortals had lived not in separation but in harmony. Vampire strength protecting mortal ingenuity. Mortal warmth tempering vampire coldness. Two peoples, different but complementary, building something greater than either could achieve alone. The Veil Treaty hadn't been created to maintain peace. It had been created to divide and weaken both sides. To ensure vampires remained isolated in their immortal superiority and mortals remained fearful in their fragile ignorance. My bloodline carried the memory of that lost unity. The Hales had been bridge builders, mediators, the family that maintained balance. And Calvin had systematically destroyed us, bankrupted us, erased us from relevance because we remembered what he wanted forgotten. "No!" Calvin screamed, abandoning his fight with Sebastien to lunge toward me. "You're destroying everything." Sebastien caught him mid-leap, driving him to the ground. "She's revealing everything. There's a difference." The ritual's truth washed over the chamber one final time, and this time it touched Calvin himself. He aged before our eyes. Elegant, white-haired vampire who appeared in his 60s suddenly looked ancient, withered, his skin turning to parchment. The stolen centuries he'd accumulated through dark magic, life forces drained from victims, years ripped from the dying, came crashing back on him at once. "You've doomed us all," he rasped, his voice cracking with age and fury. Unity means vulnerability. Separation kept us strong. You've made us weak. No, I said quietly, stepping out of the ritual's dying energy. Fear made you weak. Love makes us strong. Calvin opened his mouth to respond, but he'd run out of time. 8 centuries of borrowed life demanded their due. He crumbled to dust, his fine clothing collapsing around nothing, his conspiracy dying with him. The remaining traitors surrendered immediately, dropping weapons and falling to their knees. Without Calvin's will driving them, they were just frightened vampires who'd bet on the wrong side of history. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of settling stone and labored breathing. Sebastien was at my side in an instant, catching me as my knees buckled. The ritual's power had taken everything I had and then some. I was alive. Changed, certainly I could feel a difference thrumming through my veins. But alive. The trials are complete, an old vampire noble announced, his voice shaking. The prophecy is fulfilled. Clara Hale has proven her worth and revealed truth we'd forgotten. The court acknowledges her as queen consort of the night court. Sebastien held me as the remaining vampires bowed, some reluctantly, others with genuine respect. The ring on my finger had bonded completely with my blood during the ritual. I was neither fully mortal nor vampire now, but something in between. Something new. A bridge between worlds, just as Marguerite had intended. The hard work, I murmured against Sebastien's shoulder, is just beginning. Yes, he agreed, pressing a kiss to my temple. But we'll face it together. 3 days later I woke to sunlight. Real sunlight, warm and golden, streaming through windows that had been shuttered for centuries. I sat up in Sebastien's massive bed. Our bed now, though we'd spent most of the past 3 days sleeping separately, recovering from the Soul Forge's toll. Sebastien sat in a chair by the window reading, and he wasn't burning. You're in sunlight, I said stupidly, still half asleep. He looked up with a smile that transformed his face from beautiful to incandescent. The prophecy's fulfillment changed the rules. Vampires can walk in daylight now. We're weakened by it, exhausted more quickly, but we no longer burn. He closed his book. Immortals can access blood magic, though it's limited. The barriers between our peoples are dissolving. The Veil Treaty had been formally dissolved the day after the Soul Forge. In its place, vampire and mortal representatives had drafted the Covenant of Thorns and Roses, named for the Citadel's doors, symbolizing beauty and pain intertwined, protection and partnership balanced. Today was my coronation. They dressed me in burgundy silk this time, but not as sacrifice, as triumph. The same color that had marked my humiliation now marked my ascension. Silver thread depicted roses and thorns climbing from hem to collar, and the royal ring caught the light like captured starlight. The throne room was packed with both mortal and vampire nobles. The ceremony was unprecedented, combining traditions from both peoples, creating something new from old rituals. I saw Isla in the front row, tears streaming down her face, dressed in the formal robes of royal advisor for mortal affairs. She'd accepted the position with characteristic grace and immediately begun drafting integration policies that were both practical and visionary. I also saw Julian Ashford, forced to attend by social obligation, face a mask of bitter regret. Vivian had left him the day after my engagement to Sebastien. The Ashford's reputation in tatters, their political influence crumbling. He tried to reach out, to apologize, to explain. I'd sent his letters back unopened. He was irrelevant now, a footnote in a story that had moved far beyond him. When Sebastien placed the crown on my head, silver worked with rubies that matched his eyes, I felt the weight of it and didn't flinch. I'd earned this, survived for this, transformed into someone who could carry this burden and make it look like wings. Queen Consort Clara Hale of the Night Court, the arbiter announced. Bridge between mortals and immortals. Keeper of prophecy. May her reign bring balance to all peoples of Thornwick. The throne room erupted in applause, not universal, not unanimous, but genuine enough to matter. That evening, Sebastien and I stood on the Citadel balcony watching the sun set over Thornwick. The city was transforming before our eyes. The Veil walls being dismantled stone by stone. Mortal merchants were setting up shops in the shadow market. Vampire scholars were visiting the royal library. Children, mortal and not, were playing together in parks that had once been segregated. It wasn't perfect, There were protests, conflicts, inevitable growing pains. But it was progress. The court will challenge you at every turn, Sebastien said, leaning against the railing beside me. You've upended 8 centuries of tradition in less than a week. Good. I smiled, fierce and unrepentant. Tradition killed Marguerite. I intend to make sure it never kills anyone again. He laughed, sound warm and genuine. You're not her, you know. Marguerite was brave and brilliant, but you're fiercer. More dangerous. I had to be. I had further to fall before you caught me. We stood in comfortable silence as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The future stretched before us, uncertain and challenging, filled with enemies who'd resist change and allies who'd demand more than we could give. But for the first time in centuries, Sebastien, and for the first time in years, for me, there was hope. I have something for you, Sebastien said, producing a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not the ornate royal band already on my finger, but something simpler. Silver, unadorned except for an inscription on the inside. Clara and Sebastien. Choice, not prophecy. The first ring was political, he said softly. Necessary for prophecy and protocol and survival. This one is personal. He took my hand, his cool fingers gentle against my skin. Will you marry me, Clara Hale, not because fate demands it or prophecy requires it, but because I choose you? Because you choose me. I pretended to consider, watching him squirm slightly. Only if you promise to argue with me for the next 8 centuries. I have very strong opinions about integration policy. I'm counting on it. I slid the ring onto my finger beside the first. They fit together perfectly, as though designed as a pair across centuries. I pulled him down into a kiss as the sun set and the moon rose. Twilight, the balance between light and dark, mortal and immortal, the space we now inhabited together. When we finally broke apart, the stars were beginning to emerge. Below us, Thornwick glowed with both gas lamps and moonfire. Mortal districts and vampire neighborhoods no longer separated but slowly, painfully, beautifully blending. The prophecy is complete, I said, leaning into his embrace. The prophecy is complete, he agreed. But our story is just beginning. And there, on the citadel balcony, 2 souls finally united, separated by 8 centuries, brought together by humiliation and prophecy and choice, looked toward a future they would build together. Not mortal, not vampire. Something new. Not perfect, but possible. And for 2 people who'd survived betrayal, loss, trials, and truth itself, possible was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for watching. We hope you sure enjoyed it and learned a thing or two. Don't forget to click that subscribe button, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from. Also click on the image on your screen to watch more beautiful, heartwarming stories and stay updated with our latest content.